Over the years, I've heard all kinds of arguments when it comes to video games. Arguments like, do violent video games make people more violent? Is this console better than that console? If you only play sports games or mobile games or casual games, are you really a true gamer? And, most important of all, does Master Chief's suit suck him off? But a lot of these arguments have to do with a game's length. If I had $1 for each time I heard someone say that a game isn't worth $60 because it's only X amount of hours, I would have enough money to shave my head and blast off to space in a cock rocket. For many, game length is an important part of their purchasing decision. It's not really a surprise. I mean, $60 isn't an insignificant amount of money. Wanting a certain amount of something for your money isn't a bad thing. But sometimes this almost singular focus on length can lead people to buying mediocre games because, well, they have content. This isn't me trying to say that a longer game can't provide more value for people than a shorter one. Some of the most celebrated games of all time hold pretty long run times. Bethesda games are known for having their lengthy campaigns with a lot to do. Games like Red Dead Redemption 2 and Grand Theft Auto 5 are highly regarded for the sheer amount of things that you can do inside their worlds. The Witcher 3 can take you well over 100 hours to get through, even if you aren't going out of your way to do additional content. And I can see why people do like these lengthy adventures. Longer games can do things that shorter games just kinda can't. One of these things is the feeling of getting stronger over time. There's something special about facing a challenge that's pretty much impossible at an early stage of the game, only to come back after like 100 hours and make it your bitch. It's part of why optional bosses like Karstag felt so good to defeat. This slow power progression can feel satisfying when looking back at where you started, but the time investment makes it feel even better. Any less time to get overpowered, and it would feel like the game's kind of just handing it to you instead of you earning that power. For most of these games, their journey is more important than the destination. These games often encourage you to set your own goals and overcome them, or maybe to set no goals at all and just exist in these worlds. There's not always a good reason to go into a cave in Skyrim or go on a morning hunting expedition in Red Dead, or any other random task in these games. Sometimes the only reason you need for these things is because you want to do them. The best of these long games reward you for doing these things that you want to do, when in reality you were probably just doing it to find an excuse to spend just a little bit more time in a digital world that you like. But I think that the strongest thing that a long game can bring that short games often struggle to keep up with is their characters. The Witcher 3 is a great example with Geralt. If you've only played the first dozen or so hours of The Witcher 3 or know nothing about the series, you might write Geralt off. He can come off as a rough character mix between Han Solo and a piece of rye bread. If this is the only experience you have with the game, I wouldn't blame you for calling Geralt a somewhat one-dimensional character. But if you talk to someone who's spent a couple real-life days with Geralt, they'll tell you a very different story about who he is. As the game continues, you learn more about him, his relationships, and the world around him in a slow drip feed of information. The amount of time you spend with him and the other characters bonds you to them in a way that a shorter game can struggle with. Watching a character die after 100 or so hours of a grand RPG hits a lot different than watching a character die after hour 10 of a game. That's not to discount shorter games and their characters. I mean, The Last of Us is a relatively short game, and despite that short runtime, players still find a connection that they feel with either Joel, Ellie, or both. But with a longer game, we can just have more access to these characters. Each of them could be as well written as Joel and Ellie, and we'd get to see them more than in a shorter game. A longer game is just going to give the player more time to explore these characters in a deeper way. But not every single game fits into this same mold of a large, open-ended RPG. Some of them end up being games that would traditionally have shorter runtimes that we just play a lot of. I bet if you checked your playtimes right now, more than 75% of you would have a multiplayer game at the top of your most played list. And the hour difference is probably pretty significant, like 2 to 3 times as many hours than your most played single-player game. This isn't to shame you for how many hours you're spending in multiplayer games, it's really just to ask you, how are you bad after... Jesus Christ, is that 1100 hours? Dude, that is straight up 46 days of your life. You could have written a book in that time. That is 400 hours away from getting a pilot's license, my guy. You could have used that time to figure out how to talk to girls, dude. Okay, that last one's a little ridiculous. But like taxes and clickbait, multiplayer time sinks are just a fact of life. This is more or less by their design, especially now that they need to sell you a hat that costs 14 fucky buckies, which equates to about $17.95 real money. But now you're left with just one extra fucky bucky, which isn't enough to buy anything, so it will forever sit there mocking you for buying a skin and still being complete dog shit. There's also games that are highly reliant on mastery, like tactical FPS and fighting games. The skill floor for these games is often very high, which means that they just take more time to get into in the first place. But once you're in the door, you realize that you've entered into the video game community crack house, where dudes are scratching their arms, labbing combos for characters that they'll never once play. Some dudes blindfolded, grinding flick shots in aim lab. You hear murmurs about how Moment 37 was a religious event, while watching another guy grab his whiteboard to explain why his M4 purchase on Eco wasn't a mistake, but actually a pro gamer move. All of this before you lock eyes with a guy staring you down, licking his lips, asking if you want to play a little Marvel vs. Capcom 2. It's not a pretty place, but it's a prettier place compared to the ultimate fentanyl den of video games, the MMO. In the land of the MMO, there's a little something for everyone, which is kind of the problem. If you want to do a little PvP, it's here. You want to run around and talk to a million people? We've got that too. You want to meet your wife and start a real life family? Then keep paying for that sub, you fucking addict. You want good quest design? What the fuck do you think this is? Go and kill 10 boars already. These multiplayer games can and do take a large amount of people's time, but there's other niche games that take a lot of people's time as well. For some people, it can be roguelikes that provide almost endless possibilities. For some people, it's simulation games that seem to have an endless amount of content. For others, it's racing games with each track becoming muscle memory after hundreds or thousands of hours. Finally, there's the people playing grand strategy games where they fulfill their dreams of nuking the world after promising everyone that the nukes that they built were just for show. There's also games that pretty much don't have an end until you decide you're done playing them. This is where I slot games like Minecraft, Terraria, or Stardew Valley. Games that you could get away with spending only 60 hours in and seeing the end of the game, but you're more likely to spend 600 hours in, and that's before going nuts with mods or multiplayer content. The pure amount of time I've spent in a lot of these kinds of games leaves me conflicted. On the one hand, it was worth it, but on the other hand, it was pretty much a complete waste of time. I have to ask myself if the 30 hours in Minecraft that I spent to find a bunch of gold, smelt it down, make it into gold bricks, and then make a towering golden cock really worth it. Well, of course, yeah, that's worth it, but some of these games absolutely wasted my time. I can tell you that my youth spent chasing 99s in RuneScape absolutely wasn't worth it, but at least I enjoyed doing it at the time. Whereas the next set of games I'm going to talk about, I didn't even enjoy the grind they gave me when I was playing them. I would lump a lot of MMOs into bad time sinks as well, but these time sinks are ones that are so disrespectful of your time, it's almost offensive. If you've been paying attention, you'll notice that I haven't talked about another set of very well-known long games, a set of games all made by one developer who really helped pioneer the quantity over quality approach in open world games. And look, it's our good pal Ubisoft coming at us with the same disgusting maps year after year. To make one thing perfectly clear before moving forward, I like a lot of Ubisoft games. I like Assassin's Creed and I like Far Cry. I like blowing stuff up and I like running across rooftops. It's fun, and in the moment these games can be fun, but these games are chock full of filler. If you've gone out of your way to 100% one of these games, first of all, who hurt you? Second of all, you'll know that it was not worth it. Most of them don't give you anything for doing this, which I know back a while ago I said something along the lines of, for most of these games, their journey is more important than the destination. But that fails to apply when the journey is walking through broken glass and the destination is an overflowing outhouse. This kind of design is so pervasive across Ubisoft and other open world games that it's gotten to the point where the idea of 100 plus hour adventures gets me queasy. I have to ask myself if it's going to be hundreds of hours of content that's actually worth doing, or if it's going to be filled with map markers of go here and hit a button. The games that I mentioned earlier are not free from this sin either. Even the beloved Witcher 3 has some of Ubisoft's Dorito stains on it with the monster nests and buried treasure locations, both of which feel like something that they can just put on the map as a marker so CD Projekt Red can say, look, content, stuff. They're not as bad as the Ubisoft games, because at least you get like lore pieces and stuff, but this design has bled into pretty much every open world game. Although there's other problems with this kind of game design. Skyrim doesn't really have the Ubisoft map marker disease, but some of the quests are more boring than my videos. And honestly, that's pretty impressive. I don't really care that the randomly generated quests are complete cheeks, but some of these handmade quests aren't it, Chief. Some of them can feel like you're just handed a list of things to check off. Go talk to this guy, then talk to me, then go in this cave, then kill a troll, then talk to me, then call your grandma, then go to the DMV, then plan Graham's funeral. At a certain point, I can forgive boring gameplay in the quests if the writing behind the quests is interesting. If you can sufficiently distract me from the fact that I'm pretty much just going somewhere to hit the X button because the story's good, then I can forgive it. And I know that Skyrim has to be big enough that Todd Howard never has to sell you another game ever again, but it's a problem across a lot of these huge games. Many of these quests feel like an afterthought to pad the game out, often leading to weak motivations for you to go here and get X. The Witcher can get around this problem to a certain extent because Geralt is a real character and not just a blank slate. Many of the side quests here are surprisingly well done, but they are the exception and not the rule. And even then, not every single quest in The Witcher is a masterpiece of design. Some of them are pretty lazy, just go here, click X, do whatever, with not enough writing to really validate their existence. But most of these complaints are about optional content, which makes their forgettability just a little bit more forgivable. The real issues come when this kind of bullshit is not optional. Luckily, it's less of an issue now, but I remember older school JRPGs particularly padding for the sake of padding. Doing things like making you go on red herring quests as a part of the main campaign that would add hours to the runtime without adding a sufficient amount of content. Running from here to there, recollecting items that you've already collected and places you've already explored just to pad the runtime out. Or the more often used and way lazier level spike, making all the enemies in the game way harder after every plot point, forcing you to grind for hours and hours. Luckily, these days grinding is typically optional, although there's a special place in hell for XP boosters in single-player games. It's like as a developer you're telling me that you made the game slow and boring and want me to pay to speed it back up. All of this leads me to ask, would some of these games be better if they were shorter? The answer is yes. Of course the answer is yes, because hours of grinding and running around and red herring quests is not content. While the mainstream industry has continued to pursue the idea that longer equals better, the history of the medium has shown that that's really not the case. Compiling my list for the Top 100 project, I noticed that there were only 4 games that were listed as having over 100 hours of normal playtime. Even more surprising, a vast majority of the games don't even clear the 40-hour mark. There's probably a bunch of reasons for why these games end up being shorter, but I have my own theory as to one of the reasons. My theory is that shorter games tend to have a better pace and a more cohesive experience. Chrono Trigger is only about 26 hours long, but I would argue that I was more engaged for those 26 hours than I was for the couple of hundred that I've put into Skyrim over the years. I could probably name off more of the Chrono Trigger characters, and I haven't played the game in years. It left a bigger impact in its 26 hours than Skyrim left in its 100+ hours. Many of these 100+ hour adventures tend to feel drawn out. I would rather have them be a shorter 40-hour experience if it meant a better narrative, better gameplay mechanics, or more impressive environments. I'm really willing to sacrifice length for a more well put together experience, because for many of these games it feels like that trade-off exists. Do you want the game to be hundreds of hours long with a lot of mediocre content, or 40 hours long with a lot better content? Some of my favorite games of all time have actually been lower cost, shorter experiences, games which I played once, thoroughly enjoyed, and then never played again. These games typically have a singular focus, setting out to do one thing, and they usually do it very well, but they also respect my time. They don't overstay their welcome. They're games that are okay with you beating them over a few hours over a weekend instead of watering down the experience to take days and days of your life away. Some of our collective favorite games come in at a couple of hours each. Super Mario Bros. 3, Super Mario World, Yoshi's Island, Undertale, Sonic 2, Portal. All of these games could be easily beat on a lazy Sunday afternoon, but even after the credits roll, you're probably likely going to go back and play them again. These games feel like they were meant to be replayed, asking you to come back and play them faster or better or in a different way. Some of them feel like replayability is a core part of their design. Games like Resident Evil reward you for coming back through the game multiple times. But if these games were twice as long, I can say I probably wouldn't replay them as often. I remember some of these games because in just a few short hours they were able to make an impact. For some of them, the impact is nothing more than a cool piece of gameplay that I've never seen before. Others of them just make an excuse to throw cool visuals and fun mechanics at you for a few hours. And some of them tell stories that have stuck with me long after I saw the ending credits. I'm not making the argument that every game needs to be a short experience. I really do love my long games. I have my issues with things like Skyrim and The Witcher, but at the end of the day, I still do have hundreds of hours in them. I love my long games and my short games. This is more as if you see a game that's shorter at a smaller price, it might be worth picking up. Worst case scenario, you're out $20 in a handful of hours, but you might walk away with more than you went in with. You might just walk away with a new favorite game. And no, this isn't defending $60 games that are only 1 or 2 hours long. If you're gonna make a short game as a developer, you need to price it accordingly. I'm sorry, a 4 or 5 hour campaign only is probably not worth my $60, but at the right price, it can be. I guess my point of this entire video is that it's way less about the length and more about what you do with it. And yeah, this whole video was written just to make that cock joke. I'm not even kidding. From the inception of the video till now, it was just to make a cock joke. And you know what? I bet you watched the whole thing, didn't you? If you're hearing this right now, you did. You watched the whole thing. Do you feel a little stupid? You thought you were gonna get like some kind of serious look at how like long games aren't the best sometimes, but nope. This was all just for one dick joke. I bet you were close to like hitting the like button and maybe shooting a subscribe over. Can you believe you almost did that? For a second you thought that you were actually getting some good content, but nope, not today. If you watch this channel for good content, then like you're in the wrong place, pal. But I hope you come back so you can get more goodness. I'll see you guys in the next one.
That's right, we're Japanese.